El Greco, the painter who saw heaven in shadows. Part 1. The vision that haunted him. They say that when El Greco, born Domenikos Theotokopoulos, painted a face, he didn't just paint flesh. He painted the soul. And yet, what most people don't know is that for the last years of his life, he swore he had seen the soul with his own eyes. It was a summer evening in Toledo. The old painter stood at the window of his high-shadowed studio, the city stretching below him like a dark labyrinth. And then, it happened. The light changed. The horizon dissolved into gold, and from the sky descended a vision so bright it burned his eyes, a twisting spiral of fire, and within it, figures in impossible motion, stretching upward. He later told a close friend. It was not a dream. It was not madness. It was the truth of the world revealed for a single heartbeat. From that moment on he was never the same. Every brushstroke became an attempt to recreate that vision. Every canvas a door. Every shadow a step closer to the light. The island boy who dreamed too large. Long before Toledo's golden skies, there was Crete. A rugged island of wind-whipped olive trees, Byzantine icons, and the salt breath of the Mediterranean. Domenikos was born there in 1541, into a world where art was not about beauty, it was about devotion. His father was a merchant, his mother the quiet keeper of the home, but it was the monastery's chapel that captured the boy's imagination. The icons shimmered under candlelight, their gold leaf glowing like captured sunlight. Even as a child he noticed something strange. Those faces in the icons with their elongated shapes seemed alive. As though they were leaning out of eternity, whispering secrets no one else could hear. The boy began to paint in the old style, mixing pigments in egg yolk, tracing the faces of saints with careful reverence. But his hands itched for something more, to bend the rules, to make the saints breathe, to make the skies move. By his teenage years, word of his skill had spread. But Crete was small and his ambition was not. The Venetian Empire ruled the island then, and Venice itself, glittering, decadent, alive with art, called to him like a siren. The city of masks and mirrors. Venice. When he arrived, it was as though he had stepped into a dream. Light bounced off the canals like broken glass, and the city itself was a painting, crimson velvets, golden mosaics, shadows and masks. Here he studied under the masters of the Renaissance, Titian, Tintoretto, Veronese. He learned oil painting, perspective, anatomy, the tricks of the Western style. But even here, surrounded by grandeur, he could not let go of his own strange vision. He elongated figures until they seemed like flames themselves, bent space to create impossible depth, made skies churn like storms. Some patrons loved it. Others whispered, "The Greek paints as if the world is about to end." It was in Venice that he began to carry a small leather-bound sketchbook everywhere. In it he scribbled strange notes in Greek, Italian, and Spanish. Sometimes just words, light as spirit, shadow is the test of the soul, God is geometry and fire. Rome and the broken pride. From Venice he went to Rome expecting glory. But Rome was a city of jealous eyes. The circles of Michelangelo's disciples were powerful, and Domenikos made the mistake of criticizing the master himself, saying that Michelangelo did not know how to paint. It was blasphemy in Rome. Commissions dried up. Friends turned away. The Greek found himself wandering the city at night, his sketchbook growing heavier with visions he could not sell. It was in this period of hunger and humiliation that he painted one of his first great works, a strange, towering Last Judgment, unlike any the world had seen. The figures floated upward in ribbons of light. Christ was a blade of flame at the center. When the painting was unveiled, some viewers were entranced. Others muttered about madness. But fate was already moving him toward the city that would define him. Toledo, Spain. Part 2. The City of Saints and Spies. Arrival in Toledo. Toledo. The city rose from the Spanish plains like a fortress carved from fire and stone. Narrow streets twisted in impossible angles, and the bells of its cathedrals rang like the voice of judgment itself. When El Greco arrived in 1577, Spain was at the height of its empire, but it was also a place of fear. The shadow of the Inquisition lay over everything. A misplaced word, a brushstroke that seemed theologically suspect, could be your undoing. And yet, Toledo welcomed him. Here he was commissioned to paint for the church itself, a test that could either make his fortune or end his life. His first major Spanish work, The Disrobing of Christ, was unlike anything the priests had seen. Christ stood bathed in crimson light, a calm eye in the storm of soldiers and jeering faces that twisted like serpents around him. Some called it divine. Others called it dangerous. The Inquisition examined the painting line by line, searching for heresy. They found none, but they whispered that the Greek saw Christ in a way no one else dared. The House of Two Worlds. El Greco took a house near the Jewish quarter, overlooking the river. By day, his studio was a cathedral of color, long beams of sunlight streaming through high windows, half-finished canvases leaning against the walls like slumbering giants. He worked feverishly, sometimes for days without rest. His assistants said they would find him standing in the same spot at dawn, brush in hand, eyes fixed on the air as if he were painting something only he could see. He began to create figures so elongated they seemed to stretch toward heaven, faces lit from within by a strange, otherworldly glow. Toledo's merchants wanted portraits, but he painted them like saints or prophets, their eyes carrying secrets they hadn't known they possessed. At night the house changed. The candles threw long shadows against the plaster walls and sometimes, just for an instant, those shadows seemed to move. His servants swore they heard voices in the upper rooms, even when the master was alone. The visions deepened. By the 1580s, El Greco's reputation had grown. He painted the burial of the Count of Orgaz, a vast, swirling masterpiece where heaven and earth collided on a single canvas. In the lower half, the burial is rendered with perfect realism, but above it, saints and angels rise in a spiraling flame, their bodies impossibly long, their garments like rivers of light. Crowds gathered to see it. Some wept openly. Others turned away disturbed. When asked how he had imagined such a thing, El Greco would only say, "I did not imagine it. I remembered it." The visions were no longer rare. Sometimes as he worked, the walls of his studio would seem to dissolve, and he would see the heavens open, vast, cold, terrifying in their beauty. He began sleeping less, eating little, his mind consumed by the need to paint faster, as if time itself were closing in. Shadows of the Inquisition. But Spain was not kind to those who stood apart. The Church, though impressed by his genius, was wary of his defiance of tradition. He refused to follow the rigid rules of proportion and perspective demanded by the Renaissance. Critics accused him of distorting God's creation, of painting souls, not bodies, and to some that was blasphemy. One winter night, a messenger arrived at his door with a summons. El Greco was to appear before an Inquisition tribunal to explain certain irregularities in his religious paintings. The painter walked into the chamber dressed in black, carrying no defense but his voice. He spoke of light as the breath of God, of shadow as the measure of faith. The priests listened, stone-faced. In the end they let him go. Perhaps they saw in him a man too strange to be dangerous, or perhaps they too feared that he had truly seen what he claimed. Part 3. The Edge of Heaven. The Light That Burned. The 1590s brought El Greco the kind of fame few foreign artists had achieved in Spain. He was sought after by nobles, priests, and wealthy patrons. His workshop was busy, his home filled with the scent of turpentine, wet plaster, and expensive pigments brought from Venice and beyond. And yet, he seemed restless. His canvases grew taller, his figures more stretched, as if their bodies were trying to escape the gravity of the earth. The colors, once vivid, became sharper, harsher. Faces emerged from darkness like ghosts lit by a distant fire. Friends began to notice a strange pattern. After each major painting, El Greco would fall into a fever. He would lock himself in his studio for days, muttering prayers in Greek, Latin, and sometimes words no one recognized. When he emerged, his hands trembled, not from age but from something deeper. One of his assistants, a young apprentice named Matteo, once dared to ask, "Master, why do you paint them so tall?" El Greco looked up, his eyes glazed but burning. "Because that is how they stand before God." The rift. Toledo loved his genius, but it also whispered about his arrogance. He charged enormous sums for his work, often far more than patrons expected. When they complained, he refused to lower his prices, saying a vision was worth more than gold. One powerful nobleman took him to court over an unpaid commission. El Greco appeared before the judges not with apologies, but with the unfinished painting itself, setting it in the courtroom like an icon on an altar. The judges were silent, moved, but the lawsuit cost him both money and influence. Worse, the church began to turn away. The younger generation of painters in Spain favored realism, clarity, and order. El Greco's visions were called madness dressed in color. His commissions dwindled. But instead of changing, he doubled down. He began painting scenes so strange, so filled with spirals of light and impossible forms, that they looked like glimpses into another dimension. The Last Experiment. In his 60s, El Greco became obsessed with a single idea: a work so vast and complex it would be his final statement. He called it the opening of the fifth seal, inspired by the book of Revelation. It was unlike anything before it, a whirlpool of naked, elongated souls reaching toward a sky split open with divine light. Angels and beasts hovered at the edge, and St. John threw his arms wide as if summoning the apocalypse itself. Visitors who saw it in progress spoke of feeling dizzy, even ill, as if the painting's proportions defied the natural order. One monk fled the room, crossing himself, muttering that no mortal should see such things. El Greco worked on it for years, refusing to sign his name until it was perfect. But perfection never came. The more he painted, the more he felt the vision slipping from his grasp. Whispers of the end. In the winter of 1614, the old painter fell gravely ill. He could barely hold a brush, yet he demanded to be carried into his studio each morning. His assistants found him staring at the fifth seal for hours without moving, his lips moving in silent prayer. On the night of April 7th, the candles in his house burned low. The wind howled through the narrow Toledo streets. They say the master rose from his bed, walked into the studio, and stood before his final painting one last time. The next morning he was found kneeling, his hand resting on the lower corner of the canvas. His eyes were open, fixed on the painted heavens above. Some swore there was a faint smile on his face. Part 4, The Final Legacy. The Silent Testament. After El Greco's death, Toledo fell into a strange silence. His studio was left untouched for days, canvases half-finished, brushes stiff with dried paint, and the great opening of the fifth seal looming like a silent portal between worlds. His contemporaries whispered tales. Some said he had touched the divine, others that he was cursed by it. His elongated figures, once scorned, became the symbols of a beauty and anguish no one else dared to portray. The shadow's gift. Centuries passed. His works traveled far beyond Spain, finally earning the reverence they deserved. Art historians saw in his paintings not just color and form, but a raw dialogue between light and darkness, flesh and spirit, reality and dream. El Greco's legacy was more than brushstrokes. It was a profound invitation to see the world through a fractured, radiant lens, where the sacred hides in shadows and madness dances with grace. Epilogue, The Eternal Gaze. Look into the burial of the Count of Orgaz and you'll feel the weight of faith and doubt entwined. Gaze upon his saints and sinners, stretched and soaring, and sense the eternal struggle of the human soul trying to break free. El Greco painted not what he saw with his eyes, but what he perceived with his soul. And in that perception lies his true immortality. If you felt the pull of this story, the shadow and light that danced through El Greco's life, remember, art is not just what hangs in museums. It's the echo of a soul reaching for the infinite.